Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. I am Peter Englert. That was the most radio voice I've ever done. I don't know. Anyways.
Good start. It's good.
Let's go with it. Let's go with it. So I'm here with our producer, Nathan Yoder. He is awesome. And then with our illustrious co-host, Aaron Mercer, Communications Director. We are brought to you by Browncroft Community Church. And we respond to the questions you don't feel comfortable asking in church. And today the question we're going to respond to is, why does Christianity offer the most creativity to solve the world's problems? We are with Steve and JJ Harling from Compel Global. Aaron, you have any thoughts before we throw it to them?
It's a great question. I love it. There's so much. I think there's a lot to be talked about here. I'm so glad that we have the Harlings with us for this. Yep. This is gonna be a great conversation. You're off to a good start with your radio voice. Illustrious. I don't know what to do with that. I mean, I'll take it, but we'll work with it. But yes, let's jump in. This is great.
All right, let's start here. We want to hear your story, but tell us about Compel Global. How did that get started?
Okay, so here's a good way to describe it. I guess we're kind of like headhunters for global opportions. So basically,
I've told you this 100 times.
We're headhunters. We
headhunters and missions don't have a good history. So let's just let that out there.
There is some history there.
Let's go with matchmakers.
Right.
much
basically,
wiser.
what we do is we find people.
Problems.
All right, let me just explain what this thing is. So basically, what we do is we find people and we find resources to come alongside of international ministries. Right. So we find where there's global needs, and there's tons of needs all over the world, everything, we call them the big five: poverty, ignorance, disease, corruption or violence, and spiritual darkness. And we look at those things and we say, okay, who's doing what, where, and how can we come alongside and support them? And that's supporting them with people and resources. Okay. So we match people and resources here with opportunities there.
Yep. Simplest way to put it is that we're connectors. So we connect God's people to God's purposes. We're not a sending agency by design. Instead, we are literally focused on that niche of seeing people come alive in their sense of purpose and spiritual calling.
Think eharmony.com or match.com.
Much better. Yeah. That's
not headhunters.com.
I still like
headhunters.com. That's not good.
I wonder if anybody has that domain. Actually, that might not be bad.
Headhunters for Jesus.
Headhunters.com. That's good.
I love this. Well, I think some of our listeners, they like headhunters because that means they can get a new job. So it's not all terrible.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good.
Exactly.
So I'm glad we asked about that because that frames our episode. Tell us just a little bit about your story. It's a father-son team.
Yeah.
Steve, you used to be the lead pastor here. JJ, you were like some type of pastor here even in high school. So, I mean, tell us a little.
I was a trouble raiser. No, I grew up, obviously, we grew up here together. Dad was pastoring. I was, in kids ministry, that kind of thing, running up and down the hallways here, driving people crazy, but they couldn't kick me out because my dad was the pastor. So it worked out really well.
It worked out good. We had a wonderful years here.
Yeah.
And honestly, after moving from Browncroft, we continued in pastoral ministry for a bunch more years. And then I raised up a young guy who he'd been a former drug dealer, and he came to faith in Jesus. And I brought him on to help with some youth ministry as an intern, and then really walked him all the way through. Met with him every Tuesday morning for 4 years. And then finally realized this guy needs to be the lead pastor. And at that point, it was like, okay, what do I do? And I knew that I'd always had a heart for what God is doing in the world and have had the opportunity to travel all over the planet, seeing what God's up to. And I thought, you know what, why don't I just stand somewhere between churches and the rest of the world and figure out how do I bring them together? And ultimately, that kind of led us to starting this new thing. Yeah. And it's been an amazing ride. We love what we're seeing overseas and in so many countries around the world. There's just remarkable stuff happening, and remarkable people, and creative people, energetic people, passionate people, entrepreneurial people, and we're seeing the difference they're making. And we're just thinking, man, how do we get churches in America and entrepreneurs in America and people with gifts and skills and abilities in America? How do we tie them together with what these guys are doing internationally? So I think that's where I want to spend the rest of my life going and doing. And JJ, you've had 15 years of really in the recruitment field.
Yeah.
So you bring that whole skill set to the table.
No, I do. I've spent the last 15 years working for mission organizations, helping people find their role and their fit in global missions. But for me, really, and for both of us, I think it comes from a passion for the local church. A little bit of my story. So after we left Browncroft, Dad ended up pastoring a different church that shall remain nameless, and it was a really honestly, it was a really painful experience. And I remember being a college student watching what was happening, and I just kind of concluded, church is not for me. I love Jesus. Me and Jesus are good, but church is not for me. His people drive me crazy. I was over and done with church. And I remember very clearly taking a jog on the beach, and God reminded me what he thought of his church, what he had done for his bride, and he called me into serving the bride, but specifically to help churches have their eyes on the harvest. So for us, this really is a calling with what we're doing with Compel Global, is about helping mobilize the church, the people of God, to have their eyes on the harvest.
That's great. No, and it's, from what I understand with Compel Global, you're trying to make sure. So my guess is over the years, there were times when people wanted to be connected to a missions agency but didn't know where to go.
Exactly.
Or pastors wanted to connect someone in their congregation, probably you. People would have people come up to you, right?
Totally.
Yeah. But you didn't know where to. So you're trying to function as the way, like, okay, pastor,
we'll
talk to us.
We'll navigate your way to the rest of the world.
That's awesome.
So people, we connect people here with people there, projects here with projects there, money here with money there. I mean, just we stand between both worlds.
So I was looking on your website, and it was a really cool quote when it said, "It's time we do missions from imagination." Can you tell me what that means? Can you dig into that some more? And
It's your quote, Devin. I mean, that
You
was
know
you.
what? I threw
was all
that
you.
word out once, and somebody grabbed a hold of it and ran with it. And
It's true.
I look back and think, what a dumb idea. What was I thinking?
No, it's so good. So
But
good.
I think to me, I have a long history of being involved internationally. So in 1925, my grandparents literally went to a tribe of headhunters, for real. And they figured out, okay, what have we got to do to help these people? I mean, literally nobody was wearing clothes. That's how primitive it was. And they were headhunters. They were cannibals. And Grandma and Grandpa figured out, okay, what have we got to help these people with? Well, they obviously needed medical treatment. There was no medicine, no doctor, no nothing. So Grandpa started, 5 different medical clinics. The people had no education. There was really no employment, no opportunity for them because they couldn't read or write. Grandpa reduced their language to writing and started 10 schools. And then entrepreneurship. They didn't have employment. They didn't have ways of caring for themselves. Grandpa was an agriculturalist, and he knew how to. He received his training in here in the States, and so he taught these people agricultural techniques and entrepreneurship. And one thing led to another, and that tribe of headhunters was utterly transformed. And amazing things began to happen. And yes, Grandpa wound up having a very, very significant church that was very influential and continues to be very influential in the country of Nigeria today. But just seeing how he saw these needs that were great, significant human needs, and he thought about creative solutions. How can we help these people? But at the same time, respecting and validating their own culture and their own cultural values, and bringing all that ultimately to what we refer to as the Lordship of Jesus. I mean, as Jesus followers, we believe that he is the Lord of all, but we believe that Jesus loves and cares for people, and he gives creativity and solutions to deep human problems.
Yeah.
I want to go more into that because I think this question comes up a lot. I think there's a lot of 20-somethings that are like, it's better to kind of go JJ's route, as in the church isn't helpful
Right.
and things like that.
Right.
We've been talking a lot about spiritual gifts as a church. We've been talking about how the habit of know and use your gifts. It sounds so, just mystical, but how do you understand spiritual gifts? But then how do you it seems like you live this theology out every single day.
Well, I think there are natural abilities that all of us have. I mean, everybody's got some natural abilities, and then I think on top of that, there are things you can almost call them unique anointings. In other words, things that, as a follower of Jesus, God just kind of gives you a special ability in a certain area. And so for me, I always think in terms of what are my top three: wisdom, leadership, communication. Those are my top three. All right. Now, I think there's other things underneath that, but in the end, well, how do I lean into those things? And those are the things God endowed me with, and I want to press into them. And I think everybody's got some of these gifts, and there's like 21 of them mentioned in the Bible. I don't think there's a cap on it. I think there's maybe a whole lot more. But figure out how you're wired, and then figure out, okay, how do I bring how I'm wired to the mission?
Well, before we go to the practical steps, like communication. All right. You're gifted at speaking on stage. You've written, you've done. At what point is that a talent? And at what point does it cross over to spiritual gift?
Oh, dude, that's a tough question. I mean, honestly,
He's drilling you.
I don't know. You know, I thought about that a lot, and then finally I just concluded I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know sometimes where, I mean, the Bible says that when we become followers of Jesus, we have his Holy Spirit inside of us, right? So how do you know what's the Holy Spirit and what's you that's been changed and transformed by God? And how do you decide, well, now that's this, no, that's that? I don't know. I just say it's together.
That's good. Well,
I think there's I want to echo that from my perspective. You know, I think about the parable of the talents, right? And each of us have been given talents, you know, whether that's, you know, certain abilities or resources or spiritual gifts, whatever else. All of them are spiritual in the sense that they've been given to us in order to make a difference in the world, right? So we're blessed to be a blessing. And that idea really does kind of emphasize that everything in this is spiritual. Everything that you have, everything that you are is intended to bless outward. It's been given by God.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. But the other thing is, you know, there are some gifts that are really supernatural.
Totally.
And those ones, those, like, they're not even natural.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
like what?
Well, okay, so the Bible talks about the prophetic word. Or it talks about speaking in tongues, languages you don't know. You know, those are, and the gift of miracles. There are some things that are just very, very unique that you're not naturally born with. They are anointings.
Yeah. Yep. I think you see a lot of that too overseas, potentially more prominent than you do here in the U.S. as well.
Well, we might come back to that. I would encourage.
Yeah, how
I
far do you want to go on that one?
Well, no. I'd encourage all of you. Steve spoke October 17th at Browncroft. He tells some pretty powerful stories. But I guess where I want to go, and I'm going to focus on JJ for this.
Sure.
What does the practical outworking of, there's all these world's problems. You all believe that there's spiritual gifts that God, you know, whether even I know Jesus yet or not, I'm created in God's image. Like, how does this practically work out in Compel Global?
Oh man, that's so good. So, I mean, we have this foundational belief from Ephesians 2:10, right? That you know, we are His masterpiece. We're created in Christ Jesus in order to do good works ahead of time that He's prepared. So, you know, we have that as our guiding principle. We believe wholeheartedly that's true about everyone we work with. So then there's really a discovery and a discernment process to figure out your unique wiring. That's something that we do. So I mean, this word is kind of has different connotations in different world areas, but I would refer to both of us as guides. So we meet with somebody who's in point A and has a vision for what he or she feels like their life is designed for globally. They need someone to help them chart a path, and that's where we show up. We're the guide. So we're going to look at, you know, we are going to have you take a spiritual gifts test that you're going to work through with us. We are going to have you take some personality profiles, so we're going to learn about you. And then I personally believe we also want to look at your resume. What tangible skills and capacities and passions do you have? You know, have you run a business? Are you a rock climber? One of my really good friends actually was a rock climber for years, and he realized there's a place for that in kingdom work. So he actually moved to North Africa, started a rock climbing company. He's been able to be there now for 10 years, fluent in Arabic, discipling people left and right. It's a for-profit company. Those kind of things, creative is all get out, but it looks at what is my history, what skills have my history given me to shape my future.
So you give some some direction to the creativity people are bringing to you.
Absolutely.
It sounds like maybe do you also try to coach some of the creativity out, like maybe open people's eyes to things they haven't thought about before?
For sure. Well, and I think that's one of the things, and this kind of speaks to one of your questions as well, Peter, but my impression for years, growing up in church, I would skip the potluck at Missions Sunday because I hated it. I'll be honest with you. It was not my thing. I would never go to that, right? Because I had allowed this narrative in my head that missions looks a particular way, right? So a certain type of people are missionaries. That's not me. That's not my life. I don't resonate with that because I had allowed this script to build up of what a missionary is and what church missions really looks like. And I think I've had to unlearn those patterns. And so that I walk a lot of candidates through that process of, what are your assumptions about what missions looks like? Let's unlearn those. And I'm just going to seed you with a bunch of creative stories. And once you unlearn what you thought it looked like, then we can shape together what does the future look like.
So I want to kind of hold on that because
Sure.
I think this is where I think you and Steve, this is a sweet spot. So I'm forgetting the atheist's name, but he wrote in the Atlantic, I think, and he said, like, Africa would not be where it is without Christians. So I think that one of the assumptions to someone that doesn't come to church, they think there's all these problems in the world and Christians are kind of sitting on their hands. Paint us a picture of what the world would look like without Christians across the globe thinking creatively.
Wow, that's a good
It's a great question. So
you
good.
know, again, I've my world is largely Africa. Okay, I grew up there. My family has deep roots there. I know the continent. Been to just about every country in Africa. I honestly, it's hard. All those big five we talked about, poverty. You look at how the church has created opportunities, job creation, entrepreneurship, opened up tremendous doors to address the issue of poverty. And yes, there's a lot of poverty, but you have to look at the growth of the middle class in Africa. And you have to ask yourself, where did that come from? It came from education. Where did the education come from? Well, it came because people came from America and other parts of the world and started to reduce language to an alphabet, something that can be read and written. All right. You look at medical care, and this is true. If you look at our own country, where did all the Yale medical schools and the Harvard medical schools, where did all that start? It started because somebody believed in the value of the human life and the importance of providing health care and doing research. These things have their roots in a Christian worldview, whether it's education or health, entrepreneurship. All of these ideas are rooted in a Christian ethos. And I think, sometimes we look at it and we say, well, that's not true of our country. Yeah, but look at the origins.
Yeah.
That's where it came from.
Let me jump in on that. It's a bit of a soapbox for me. And I look at contemporary U.S., church world, and I think we've allowed ourselves to get comfortable reacting to culture. Okay? We've allowed ourselves to get comfortable reacting to culture. This doesn't come from me. It comes from Erwin McManus, just so you know. But Erwin challenges us that the real calling of a Christ follower is to shape culture. Not reacting to culture, but to shape it. So you apply that at a global level. That's the history of the church. That's the history of Christ followers, is they have shaped culture. They've shaped development in all of these different areas. They've brought skills and capacities in the sciences, the arts, medicine, all of these different sectors, including discipleship, at the forefront. And I think as a result of that, you've seen incredible advances throughout the globe. Christ followers shape culture.
What have you found, through Compel Global, through years of ministry before that as well, and both of the places you've been? What's been the biggest obstacle to that sort of creativity taking hold amongst people who want to shape, who want to make a difference, who feel called? What trips them up?
I think there's a couple of things, but one of the big ones is our addiction to clarity. All right. So if I'm meeting with a candidate really early on, first conversation, and I say, man, you feel like God's preparing you for a new season. What's holding you back? And they'll say, I'm just waiting for God to give me clarity on what what the path looks like. And it's an uncomfortable moment in a conversation because I'll tell them I'm not going to pray for that. That's not, God's not in the business of illuminating your whole path. If you're waiting for that, you're never going to do a thing. He's in the business of illuminating the next step because he wants to cultivate your trust and your courage as you walk in obedience. So I'm going to pray that over you. And that tends to be a really uncomfortable moment in the conversation, but it steers them on this trajectory of action, right? You're walking into the unknown intentionally because you have to trust. So I think that honestly is one of the biggest hurdles I've seen.
Absolutely.
I would wonder, if we really got that wish to know the clarity of our whole path, we probably would be scared if we not take the first step, right? Yeah. What we have in mind usually isn't anywhere close. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
But I will tell you, though, it's amazing how often we fall into that trap.
Yeah.
If I just knew what I was supposed to do, I'd do it. Dude, sometimes you just take the next step. That's it. Mm-hmm. And you don't know what it's going to be, and that's got to be okay because God is pleased with trust.
And
that's what he really wants.
Can you tell us? I'm sorry if you're just jumping in there. Can you tell us an example from your own work in missions, a step that you took, whether it was going to another country or maybe it was a move here in the States, but something that you wished you had more clarity, but then looking back, you're glad you didn't because you wouldn't have taken the step in the first place?
Oh, absolutely. I think right now, starting
the
Compel
last 8
Global.
months, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
100%.
I mean, the last 8 months. Gee, I've wanted clarity more than anything. I tell you what, God gave me two things very clearly. And I don't hear, this spoken audible word, but this was about as close you can get to it. And God said, I want you to give me two things. I want you to give me your need for significance and your need for security. And I said, God, look at this point in my life. I've pastored great churches. I've run an international organization with big budgets and lots of staff. And just to be able to throw that all aside and start from scratch, you got to be kidding me. And then security. Look, I'm at a point in my life where most guys my age are thinking about how do I just get ready to retire? And here I am throwing away my financial security, taking this wild ride, and God's just saying, trust me, I got this covered. I'm going to take care of you. I mean, scary as anything, but amazing too.
So I want to come back to our listeners because I feel like our listeners, they want to make a difference. It might be inside or outside of the church. And, so there's a couple tensions. Do I join an organization or do I start my own? Do I find a need or, if I'm an underwater basket weaver, do I try to take that need and again, just trying to be humorous, but but I mean, help our listeners kind of cultivate a more global view of starting versus, joining, need versus this is a gift or a skill or a talent.
So I think there's a couple of factors in there. I would encourage just about anybody to recognize the value that agencies bring to the table. I work as a part of the Compel Global movement. I also work for World Venture, which is a sending organization I believe in. But there's a number of really great ones, and I think the thing to me is, it's so much harder to go out and completely start something on your own. You dive into a context where you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a creative thinker, but you have an organization to provide those services that you need. So that would be my advice to most people that, want to make a difference. But there's a ton of different organizations to choose on. So come talk to us. Because they all look different. They have different, different benefits. They have different ethos, and you need kind of a third-party advisor to say, you fit here, you don't fit here. These guys you'll resonate with, these ones you won't.
Do the agencies, have you found that they're helping these people who want to make a difference grow in their creativity? Does it help to have a community of people around you that are trying to strive towards the same goal? What have you found with that possibility?
I think my answer to that is it's a bit of a mixed bag. If you're an entrepreneur, there are certain agencies that are more welcoming and conducive to entrepreneurs. I mean, entrepreneurs are an interesting breed, but there's amazing opportunities out there for entrepreneurs. But you got to be with an agency that gets the way you think, allows you to operate with a certain amount of independence. And not everyone's like that. So anyway, that's part of why we exist. We just find ourselves, we listen to people, we hear where their hearts are, and then we try to find them a match for an organization that is a good fit for them.
Cool.
I want to get semi-controversial because just
Whatever.
like doing
You do
that.
you.
that's what we do. So like you told the story of the person that's rock climbing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our listeners might struggle with the missionary support model, you know, which we give money every month. And just full disclosure, I give money directly to missionaries. We
Right.
give to the missions fund here. But there is this new model, which you're talking about entrepreneurs, which is I'm going to start a business. I'm going to be self-sustaining. Help us understand how that's flipping. How's that changing? You know, should I still give money monthly, or should I give, you know, $1 million loan? You'll say, I'll take any, but I mean, because I think that this is important, because you can watch TV and someone's calling saying, hey, give money
Right.
to my ministry. But then it's like, why aren't you making money?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. I think, man, number one, we kind of allow ourselves to have some of these sacred cows in ministry, right? So again, it goes back to that predefined notion of what missionaries are, you know. And I have heard some agencies say, "Oh, real missionaries, they raise their support and that kind of thing." No, some great real missionaries have raised their support in the past. That's not technically the mandate from Scripture, right? So I think we do have to kind of really disassemble some of those assumptions we've had. There are some great mission-centric focus people that raise their support. There's others who are working in for-profit business. There's a place for all of that. There really is. So to me, I want it to be really empowering.
And you look at the scriptural though. I mean, you talk about the Apostle Paul.
Yep.
So on the one hand, he's writing to the church of Philippi, and then he has another season, where he's writing to them saying, "Look, can you guys support me?"
Right.
But in other seasons, he's out there making tents. And it depends on the context, depends upon the person. I just think there's a lot of room underneath the umbrella. Jesus said, "Go out and make disciples of all nations," but he didn't tell us do they have to be supported or not.
Right.
And I say, let's pull the lid off, explore lots of options. I wish there was something. I wish there was more models, frankly, for entrepreneurship where people can find other funding mechanisms beyond raising support, because I think that is a challenge for some folks.
Yeah.
If you're not a good communicator, it's really hard to raise support.
What's the most creative missionary model besides the rock climbing, or creative model to maybe solve a
Oh, you got a really good one.
Yeah,
on
I
this
got
one.
all sorts of different ones, but I'll tell you the craziest thing I've ever seen, and this comes from my connection with World Venture. So we've got a missionary who they launched as a couple. They went to Tokyo, Japan, and they wanted to be church planters. Okay, so they went and they tried planting a church. It didn't go anywhere, and then they realized that before they came to faith, they actually both had been lounge singers. Kid you not. And they realized that gospel music in Japan was like the thing. This is right when the movie Sister Act was really popular, and it just kind of went crazy in Japan. So they thought, well, we know how to sing. Why don't we start a gospel choir? But we're going to do it in the YMCA and see if anyone shows up. First day, there were dozens of people that showed up and paid to be a part of this gospel choir, not yet believers. So you have paying Japanese who are part of this gospel choir. Then they go out and perform to paying audiences who are not yet believers, who are also Japanese. And this thing has exploded. There are now thousands of choir participants all throughout Japan. And right in the middle of it, Ken, my friend Ken, his wife passed away, but Ken's discipling people one by one. Right in the middle of this crazy machine that he's built. So they've seen churches planted, they've seen lives changed, but it's through this, honestly, it's a profit-making, gospel choir ministry.
Wow.
Crazy. Just
That's-
crazy.
So you mentioned underwater basket weaving. I bet that might be able to figure something out.
Well, here's the thing. I talked to this couple a few weeks ago, and they're an older couple from the Midwest, and I said, guys, you're retired now. What did you do? She said, well, he was a dairy farmer, but I don't think you're ever going to find any of that. I said, sure, you're right. A few weeks later, I just happened to be browsing through our database of opportunities. I found there's a ministry looking for a dairy farmer business manager. I mean, it literally fits this guy's resume to a T. And I shot him that in an email. Within minutes, they're like, what the heck?
Wow.
How did this come about? So all sorts of creative ideas out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
super cool.
Yeah, that's so cool how the Lord probably just dropped that in there too.
Absolutely.
We serve a creative God, so
We
we
do.
shouldn't be surprised by that. So I'm curious. We talked about your story a little bit before, and how you got to where you are now. I'm curious. How did your time serving in a local church shape what you're doing today and your approach to what you're doing today? How did your time at Browncroft in particular, but just in the church, how did that shape what you're doing? How did it shape your approach to what you're doing, and maybe what you're looking for when you're trying to connect people to the right spot?
Let me say one thing. For me, as a pastor, I've always been passionate about connecting people to their call. That's always been a big deal for me. But here at Browncroft, that was really cool. But one of the things that we really got into in the early days was we were trying to figure out, we supported a lot of missionaries as a church, tons of them. But our people, I felt like there was so much more we had to offer. Expertise, energy, creativity, all kinds of things. And we weren't leveraging any of that. It was basically pay, pray, and get out of the way. That's what it was. So then we got this crazy idea, let's take a bunch of guys to Africa and just start exploring scenarios. So I took about, 6, 8 guys to Ethiopia and Kenya. And we didn't go there to build anything. We just went to look at what God's doing. And it blew all of us away. And then we came back and said, what if we just get on the ground floor? Let's find a people group somewhere in the world that has a whole bunch of needs, and let's figure out how we can get involved. And so we wrote a bunch of agencies, and they pointed us to Senegal. And we started doing stuff in Senegal. And it was a wild ride, still goes on to this day. But it was a different approach, because most people didn't think of, churches being on the front lines and coming up with strategy. But I thought, we got all kinds of people that are great strategizers in this church. Let's connect them to live out their callings.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then I know that particular mission that you're talking about is something that's still very important to the church. I mean, actually, it's really cool to see how there is this creative vision, and then also a long-term commitment, and what sort of work that can do. Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting.
What about you, JJ?
Yeah, even though I didn't attend Mission Sunday potlucks, true confession, I really do feel like Browncroft had this incredible way of cultivating youth mission trips. So they would do a mission trip every summer, and I remember those were some of the highlights of my time here. I spent 11 years at Browncroft, and looking back, those memories had a profound impact on me. Kathy Roders, that some of the leaders there just were very intentional about bringing a global conscience to our youth, and I credit the church, I credit our youth leaders for doing an incredible job, because actually so many of the youth who have come out of Browncroft's youth program are now doing things at kind of a global mission level, and that's the testimony.
So I can imagine that some of our listeners struggle with this idea. One of the assumptions of missionaries, they just preach the gospel. Like, they have to be pastors. And I can imagine some of our other listeners are like, this is great, you're started in company, but where's Jesus?
Right.
How do you, these are real conversations. So how do you manage that tension, and how do you,
Okay, I'm dying to answer that question, because to me, here's the deal. It comes down to the kingdom, right? And we always think the kingdom is like somewhere off in the mysterious, distant future. The kingdom is wherever the king is. The king is here, right? And then you look at, okay, if Jesus is the king, what were his concerns? What were his priorities? He said he came to bring good news to the poor and the broken, the powerless, set prisoners free. That's a big deal. He did come to seek and save people who'd lost their way, right? He came to be the friend of sinners, all right? Bottom line is, you just look at the example of Jesus. Our job is to join him in his mission. And his mission is to see his kingdom advance. So all that, I just don't think what needs to be an either or, it's a both and.
Yep.
They come together. Humanitarian, spiritual, it's all part of the same pie.
Where would someone take a first? Let's say someone who's listening to this podcast right now is, you sparked something inside of them that, like, you know what, I do want to use some of my skills, some of my creativity for just to see what God could do with it. I don't know the whole path, and maybe after listening to this, thinking maybe it's good I don't know the whole path.
Exactly.
But where would someone take a first step? Where would you point them?
Well, let's have some fun with that.
Sure.
I'm a Google AdWords expert.
Okay.
How do I take a first step?
Oh wow, okay,
Good,
all right.
good.
Nice.
So good. So, man, headphones down. So, I mean, first off, you got to be willing to risk a conversation. So nothing's gonna, it's not scary to initiate a conversation with us, but it needs to start in conversation. So I would ask you to reach out to us, all right? And we want to talk. We're going to spend about an hour on the phone with you. And we're just going to talk through skills, capacities, history that you have. Then, we're going to look at all of our organizational kind of partners and say, who's doing what where? And at this point in time, among our partners, we probably have work in every country on the planet. Pretty darn close.
Hundreds of opportunities.
I mean, it's incredible. But we also have, in addition to the specific opportunities that each of those agencies have, we also have an open door to bring them new types of workers, people they hadn't thought about before. So I would contact some of my friends at, World Gospel Mission or SIM or World Venture, and I'd say, guys, I have a Google AdWord, professional. How would you use them? That might be where it starts. And in fact, I actually had not too long ago, I had a friend of mine. His name is John, and John came to me. He was from the Bay Area, and we had never met before. We became friends after this. But he said, JJ, I worked on designing the iPhone. I'm a Stanford grad, worked on designing the iPhone. That's my skill set. I have a ministry plan, and I'm terrified that if I go to a mission agency, they're going to tell me to do IT. I don't want to do that. Here's my plan. Can I do this with your organization? And I said, absolutely, you can, John. Turns out he ended up actually going to Japan as well, and he became a voice of technology expertise to the Japan culture. He was on the news all over the nation, but it gave him a sphere of influence where he could speak to high-level professional leaders at Apple, at Google, whoever else, and he began to disciple people through that. But for him, the skill set lent to his platform. So I think that's one way to do it. He also ended up building a Bible app in Japanese using those skills for the country.
So one last question before we get to our final one. It sounds like you're really graying the line of, tomorrow, we have friends that work locally here at, name your favorite big business. We'll say IBM because that started there. It's almost as if, hey, if you get that call from your boss to go to Tokyo or China, you might not work through an organization, but that's probably your call to consider it.
Totally.
Like that's kind of what you're graying the lines a ton.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for gray in the lines, frankly. I think we've been too sensitive to boxing things out, or boxing things in. And I think God is far more creative than that. And one of the cool things we're seeing is the world's getting smaller all the time. And there are more opportunities for globalization and people coming and going. And I always look at it this way. Okay, you got a job with the State Department or you got a job with some company working over there. Awesome, but you're a disciple of Jesus. So your first call is to be a disciple maker, no matter what you do. And just use whatever platform God has given you.
So in that situation, let's say someone got a call like that from wherever they're working. Their boss says, we really need you to go to China or to Taiwan or to somewhere in Africa or, whatever the case may be. Would you all be able to help? Would you see your way of helping in that way of connecting them to the local, the network of believers that are there. I mean,
that's exactly it. So, let's say that happens and you're married, you have a couple kids, you got to be asking some serious questions. So it's not just about you and your profession, but it's, wow, are my kids going to be okay? How do I navigate schooling options? How do I build a sense of community or spiritual community for my family there on the ground? Honestly, you're isolated. You might be living in a country where no one else. Sin issues have a way of creeping in. So for us, we would plead with you, let us tie you into a mission organization who has a team there on the ground where you can have spiritual accountability, community, some of those benefits of actually being a part of a spiritual group to be able to hold you up.
Hey, one thing I'd throw out here, we've talked a lot about entrepreneurship, and honestly, medical stuff, dental stuff. I mean, right now, we're really looking for people that are willing to go to the Middle East as doctors. And you know what? It's a paid position.
Yep.
It's fantastic. But tremendous opportunities to be a light for Jesus in a place where you could not go in as a traditional missionary. Those are the kind of things where just like, wow, we just stand between. We see all these opportunities here, in the other parts of the world. We see so many resources and people over here. We just want to bring them together.
Yep.
Man, that's a great place to land our last question. What does Jesus have to say about creativity and solving the world's problems? Aaron, you were so good starting last time.
I'll go again. That's fine.
That's what I'm talking about.
All right. Well,
so the deal is we answer this question,
okay,
and then you clean up the mess. So
Sounds
whatever
good.
mess,
Oh, boy.
heretical,
Yes. Oh, man.
socially,
Wow.
headhunters,
Perfect. Yeah, that's
there
great.
you go.
Love it.
I think this is a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Really appreciate it. And I said this before, and I believe we all agree. God is a very creative God. I mean, obviously, He created all of us. He created this whole amazing place that we live. I think that He has creative means to put us in places where He wants us when He wants us, and I think He also has creative ways of networking us to each other and opportunities. So I love this conversation. I love the vision of what you've been talking about making sure people feel resourced, feel connected, feel like they can have a sense of accountability with each other. I think that's awesome. Just to the broader question, Peter, I mean, I just think, you hit on this, JJ. There's been so much creativity that Christians, the church has offered over the years, and there's been, you mentioned this too, Steve, the impact of that on people's lives, on their own individual lives, but also just on the positive direction in different places. So I think that, the Lord wants us to lean into our creativity. He's a creative God, and there's problems out there, so let's think of good ways to try to address them.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's really good. I guess this is what I've been thinking about. The majority of people that got to know Jesus in the New Testament went back to their normal lives. Mm-hmm. And I sit there and I think, because we get this idea, if I become a Christian, maybe I'm supposed to go to Africa and and I don't even say that for location. I say that I need to give up everything that I'm good at just to follow Jesus. But, even the disciples, while they were following Jesus, they still fished.
Amen.
Like they still went, and I don't know if it was this conversation, but someone brought up, the Church of Philippi. Probably the person who hosted that church meeting was Lydia. She sold purple, which was really, really expensive back in ancient times. And I wonder so much if we've been so focused on location that we forget, God has given me transferable gifts. And
Absolutely.
even just to the point of, I know that God calls people to certain areas, but, I think of what Jerry Gillis says from the chapel in Buffalo, and he says, is your yes on the table before God asks a question? So that's kind of what I'm leaving with.
I love that. Is your yes on the table? Because no matter where God calls us, no matter where we are, we're His followers, we're His disciples. And I think a good thing, my life verse is Ephesians 2:10. We are God's creative, one-of-a-kind piece of artwork. That's the Greek translation. Created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God ordained beforehand that we should do. Even before we were born, He already had works for us to do. And we just need to follow on, surrender, follow Him. He'll lead us.
You get to clear up your dad, man.
No.
That's awesome. That's what,
Isn't that
all
great?
three of us.
I
This
know,
is
it's
great.
amazing.
Well,
And I wouldn't even say clear up anything. I would just add another lens. I heard a guy once talking about missions work, and he said he used the analogy of shipping, and he said there's two different types of ships historically. You would have one would be a merchant ship that would sail into a new port, and he would already have his plan and a particular thing he was trying to sell. Then you would have explorer ships, and an explorer ship would go into port, and he would say, "What's up in this community? What do they need? What's happening here spiritually? How's God showing up, and how can I join him?" And so when we talk about, being creative, and it's not on you. It's on you to join what God is doing in his world, right? So our God is a creative God. Therefore, he invites me to join with him. Therefore, I'm a creative guy because I'm following after my creative master. So to me, that's kind of how I make sense of that idea of following a creative God.
where can people find you?
Yeah.
Give, support, pray for the ministry?
CompelGlobal.org is the website. We've kind of have phase 1 of our website up and live right now. In a couple of weeks, phase 2 will be live, and that'll have giving opportunities as well as going opportunities. The biggest thing is just to go there on the site, or feel free to get in touch with either of us, Josiah at CompelGlobal.org, Steve at CompelGlobal.org, or Mobilization at CompelGlobal.org.
Besides Compel, are you guys, active on social media?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead. How do they find us on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff?
JJ Harling, I'm on Facebook, Instagram as well. Both of those lead to our corporate, sites as well of Compel Global on Facebook. But then you're the same thing, Steve J Harling. Is that right?
Yep,
That's
on
how you have
Instagram.
it? Yeah.
On Twitter, he's Steve Harling 1.
Yeah, well, there you
I
go.
don't even know, I
I
don't
know.
even know.
He's number 1.
It
Well,
Don't
works
check us
out.
out on Twitter. It's not going to do anyone any favors. Neither of us are there. So.
all good. Well, we thank you so much for joining us. Remember, Why God Why exists to respond to the questions you didn't think you could ask in church. Go to whygodwhypodcast.com so you can subscribe from there. Thanks for being with us.